Danielle, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been too long. I'm so good to be back with you.
It has been long. You and I have had multiple conversations over the last couple of years, and I have to say we agree on many things pertaining to the potential fallout from consumer debt, especially now with student loan debt being needing to be paid, right? Paid back. And they're going after that hard. They're talking about garnishing wages and housing affordability issues. And we've agreed on a lot of that and the threat of recession, or we've been in recession, but not technically. And then also Fed mandates. But I want to get your current opinions, obviously, and updates on some of the issues that we've talked about and that we're facing today. But I want to take a minute because I did see one of your podcasts, and not to make you blush or anything, where you were talking about Billy Bob and Billy Bob Thornton, and how you were saying that you really thought he was a great guy. But that just kind of reminded me that I really haven't heard you talk about Danielle growing up. And I'm kind of curious. So maybe we could start out today. You could just kind of tell us, obviously you're a very prominent woman now, but what was life like for you as a kid? Where did you grow up? And just kind of give us a little backstory.
It's kind of a strange backstory. My father found out in East Haven, Connecticut, that his draft card was coming up. And by the grace of God, he did what a lot of boys did back in the 1960s. He ran out and joined the Air Force. So the whole objective was don't come home in a body bag. So you knew that you were going to, that the fatality rate of being in the U.S. Air Force was much lower than being on the front lines in the Army. Dad was sent to Lackland Air Force Base for basic training, which is today where basic trainees are still all sent in San Antonio, Texas. So from East Haven to San Antonio, Texas, they discovered very early on that my father had a talent for teaching. And so they kept him on the Air Force Base for his entire 4-year tour of duty rather than deploying him to Vietnam. My mother, she actually was at the beginning of a 37-year career as a civil servant. So she was driving up from Devine, Texas, which is somewhere around Pearsall, Texas, south of San Antonio. George Strait went to high school with her. It's out in the sticks, trust me. So she was driving up to the big city where she had her first big job on the Air Force Base as a civil servant. That is where my parents met. My father's 4-year term was up when I was 2.5 months old. So I was born in San Antonio, and we moved back to Storrs, Connecticut when I was 2.5 months old. And my father continued on finishing up his studies at the University of Connecticut in Storrs, Connecticut. So people ask me all the time, where's your big, thick Texas accent? You love that state. And I do love that state. I'm ready for Landman season 2 all over it. But my answer is because I learned how to speak the Queen's English in Connecticut, not in Texas. I ended up getting scarlet fever twice when I was a very young girl. And at some point, my mom said, moving back to Texas, the cold weather does not agree with her. So lost like half the hearing in my left ear and ended up growing up as a hybrid. I spent most of my summers growing up with my cousins and my grandparents in the Italian side of my family in Connecticut, and the school years in San Antonio, Texas. I guess one of the funny things about me growing up was that I didn't really have doll houses. I played office. So I would set up an office and a mock corporation and do the books. And I would sit up late at night in the summertime with my grandmother and count out the pennies and the nickels and the quarters and put them because my grandfather had 2 Sunoco stations on each side of I-95. So for me, I grew up playing with money and creating business. That was always kind of my thing. I was a real tomboy.
Any siblings?
Yes, I have an older sister. She passed away a few years ago. She's about 20 months older than I am. And her daughter recently had a daughter. And so she's the shining light of my life. She's growing up thinking that I am her grandmother. I am her sweet Nona. And so, yes, I have my sweet Rose, in addition to 4 wonderful children, 21, 19, 17, and 17. So I've got one more year of high school before my twins graduate. And I'm happy to report that my first two are at the University of Texas, studying finance in the Macomb School of Business, where I graduated, got my MBA. So sometimes in life, we like things that go full circle, especially when you get to go see serious football games.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, besides speaking at finance conferences all over and contributing to news commentary and visiting YouTube channels like ours, what do you do now most days?
I left the Fed on June the 12th, 2015. So I am coming up on my 10-year anniversary of running QI Research. We publish 8 times a week. We publish every trading day, a daily commentary. My flagship weekly has been published since June the 17th of 2015. So, and we publish a Saturday Outlook intelligence briefing that kind of looks at the financial markets, and then a Sunday piece that gathers together what I've been reading in the prior week and all of my media appearances for my clients. And so, yeah, publishing 8 times a week means that sleep is optional. And, but I have a real passion for what I do. I have an amazing team and an incredible community of both retail and institutional clients. On any given trading day, in the middle of the trading day, my Bloomberg chat room is hopping with my institutional clients. And so when economic reports come out in the morning, I'm instantly commenting on what they are, what they mean. And we go back and forth throughout the day talking about what's happening in the bond market, what's happening in volatility, what's happening in stocks and bankruptcy cycles. So I never sleep, but I love what I do. I have a real passion for what I do.
So you say you serve retail clients?
Yes, we publish something called the Daily Feather every day. So it's got 4 original charts in it. We tend to look at economic data that others do not. And that was what I did for the nearly decade that I was at the Federal Reserve. Was I was looking at data sets that long economists didn't look at. They only look at official data, which kind of gives them a very narrow lens into the economy and into the financial markets. So we publish the Daily Feather every trading day of the year. And then the weekly that I put out, as well as directional investment advice based on what we write about on a day-to-day basis, that goes straight to our institutional clients, different caliber, running billions of dollars of money worldwide. So I think I want to say we're in 47 states at this point, and I think 22 countries, the research.
Well, we have all your links published in the show notes below. It must be very hard doing your job now. I mean, it seems like over the last couple of months, everything changes daily. I mean, it's with the on tariffs, off tariffs, and the different deals, and what I seem to think I'm going to talk about one day, the next day it's completely obsolete. Do you find that frustrating?
I don't find it frustrating as much as I find it challenging. One of the most formative moments was when a major hurricane hit, I think it was Harvey, hit Houston years and years ago. And the U.S. economy at the time, the automobile industry was teetering on the brink of falling into contraction, which is very unusual. That usually means that the full economy is going into recession. But I think 2 million cars were lost just because of that one, because Houston was underwater for so long. And it was at that point that I started to appreciate trying to discern the signal when noise interrupts the data flow. And the trade war came along then, 2018, 2019. All of a sudden, American companies were buying forward and trying to source product before that first round of tariffs came on. And so that introduced another element of immense noise into the data. And now we've got this second round of tremendous noise, more uncertainty than I've ever seen, a longer and deeper cycle of revisions to the official data. The official data has become highly questionable, not just me. And so the challenge grows with the level of uncertainty, but that just kind of gives me more inspiration to continue looking where I can to find economic indicators. These days I'm following CEO turnover. The more CEOs who are losing their job, the more we're going to see firing, because you want to bring in somebody they're not attached to the workforce. They're agnostic. They can come in and be the henchman, the henchwoman. But we follow economic data that are not followed by everybody. And more importantly, we've learned that what the economy is doing is one thing, and what's happening on the ground is another thing. What's happening with the financial markets is another thing. So my mantra, and it's been flying across social media, is trade the narrative, own the truth. And that's kind of how we've been guiding our clients, because how you trade doesn't necessarily have to do with where the economy is, especially when the top 10% control 49.7% of consumption in an economy that is 70% spending. So it's a different world, and doing research is a much more challenging occupation than it used to be. But I love a good challenge, or I would have been playing with dolls, I think.
Well, for someone in your role, does it, are you in the stock market? I mean, I know this is sort of like a precarious question to ask, but I mean, you have insider data essentially, right? So is it, are you precluded from participating in these trades? Or if you see something that's happening or indications that are going on, what do you do about it? I mean, are you allowed to trade having that data?
Yes, and I have consulted with my securities attorneys in order to do so. I don't give out recommendations on individual securities. So I don't cover individual companies, but by law, I'm able to make my sector calls, and I can say I think the yield curve is going to be inverted for a very long time, and be completely against the grain and right. And so I help my institutional clients position themselves in the markets where they're going to see action and be able to make money on both sides of the trade. And yes, I am able to own stocks, but I'm kind of a stickler for nice fat dividends that I know are not going to be cut.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's my filter. If I know that a company is going to continue to have a very nice cash flow stream and good growth prospects, then that's a company that I'm going to like to own for the long term.
Sure. I hope you're enjoying the interview so far. I just wanted to take a brief moment and let you know that this podcast is brought to you by SachsRealty.com. Here at Sachs Realty, we're committed to bringing you the best real estate education and helping buyers and sellers achieve their real estate goals. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please consider doing so now. And don't forget, we're on every major social media platform, so you can follow us there as well. Now back to the show. Well, when you work for the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas during your stint included the GFC, the 2008 crisis, you were advisor to then President and CEO Richard Fisher. As someone who worked for the Federal Reserve and then went on to write the book titled Fed Up, an insider's take on why the Federal Reserve is bad for America, can you appreciate the current position of the FOMC and Fed Chairman Powell on whether it's time to drop interest rates?
Well, it's a difficult time for me because I had been a fan of the way that Jay Powell was running the Fed for a while. He was very much focused on beginning to regulate the shadow banking system, which it was $240 trillion, the size of the non-banking financial system in 2022. That compared to the conventional banking system, the conventional financial system that was regulated, that was $180 trillion. So I felt it was important that he was on a mission to begin to rein in some of the excesses that were occurring in the shadows. And of course, we're seeing a lot of that play out today when you see a company like Zip Car Wash, that was a darling of the private credit community, wake up one day and you find out that a company that you've been holding for 95 cents on the dollar on your books, if you're a public pension, is all of a sudden filing for bankruptcy. So a lot can go on in the private markets that is difficult for investors to track because they're not regulated in any way, shape, or form. So I have been a fan of Powell's for that very reason. And I was a big proponent of his mission, but I think he has succumbed to politics. And I hate to say that, but the University of Michigan has been polling Americans since 1968. I don't really follow their inflation metrics. They're very heavily influenced by politics themselves. But when 65%, 64%, as of the latest read, of Americans foresee a rising unemployment rate, pretty much tells you that you're in recession. And if you name the soft survey data, if you look at the revisions that show that net job losses began in the second quarter of 2024, and these are hard data. This is 97% of all employers in the country reporting, and that corrects what the Bureau of Labor Statistics initially reports on non-farm payroll Fridays, which is modeled data based on very low survey response rates. When you see that real hard data come in addition to the soft survey data, and you appreciate the experience of 2018, 2019, we have the 2019 FOMC transcripts in hand. They were published last December. And what the Fed discovered during the episode of Trade War 1.0 was that there was a greater drag on economic growth than there was any kind of an inflationary impulse. The CPI was 2.4% in 2018. It was 1.8% in 2019. And that's because when global trade declines, which we're seeing right now, we're seeing huge declines in global trade, you're going to end up having a greater drag on the economy. That is something that Jay Powell was there for and that he knows. And therefore, when 2/3 of Americans are saying, hey, the unemployment rate's going to rise, and CEOs and CFOs are pulling capital expenditure plans, when Americans are continuing to pay 20-something% on their credit cards, it's pretty apparent that monetary policy is too tight. And that simply is the case. It's the data. It's not my opinion. And the Fed choosing to ignore what's staring them in the face leaves no other explanation other than I want to stick it to the current administration by holding interest rates too high for too long so that I can drive this economy straight off a cliff and make sure that the midterm elections end up with impeachment. And again, these are very strong words, but on the front page of the Federal Reserve's website, it states that the Federal Reserve is mandated to make monetary policy in the public interest. It's not making monetary policy in the public interest right now. It's maintaining interest rates at too high of a level, and that benefits individuals who are sitting on cash and can enjoy that 4.5% rate that they're making on their money market funds. And but it's not in the public interest. It's in the interest of the chosen few. And the only reason they're doing what they're doing right now by the process of elimination is politics. And shame on Jay Powell for succumbing to politics. It's never been right that Donald Trump has castigated Powell. It's never been the purview of the White House to have a say in monetary policy. That's why the Federal Reserve was created as an institution that was apolitical and nonpartisan. So, but presidents do what presidents do. Politicians do what politicians do. But monetary policy makers at the Federal Reserve are supposed to be above that. And right now they're not. They're making monetary policy to hurt the administration. The collateral damage is the U.S. population.
You had mentioned in one of your posts that the Fed has had cover to sit on its hands and be derelict in its duty to make monetary policy in the public interest. You were referencing cover being automated inflows of 401ks and equities. Can you explain that?
So you bring up a very good point. And this is where I talk out of the other side of my mouth. because the Fed is trapped. I don't think that we would have this crazy beast of passive investing and Americans blindly pouring money into the broad indices if there wasn't this presumption that the Fed's got my back. Markets only go up. That really, really worked in 2001, right? The baby boomers lost their backsides, but they were able to go back into the workforce. And it worked again in 2007. Again, the baby boomers at the time were able to say, no need to sell out of my stock holdings. I'll just go back to work. I can go be a greeter at Walmart. I can go work the Southwest Airlines check-in desk. I can do whatever I can do to stay in the workforce and earn back what I've lost in my retirement portfolio, in my stock holdings. The median age of a baby boomer today is 70. 70. The outer edge is my mother, who is almost 79. But the median age of a baby boomer is 70. They no longer have the physical wherewithal to go back into the workforce. Americans over the age of 70 own 40% of the US stock market. They own 25% of residential real estate. The one cohort that cannot sell, are the boomers. If the 40% that owns stocks should start to sell because interest rates are falling, because they're not earning enough interest income on their savings, cash, because every dollar of interest income earned, 70 cents is spent into the economy. Every dollar of portfolio gains, only 2 cents is spent into the economy. So the wealth effect acts very differently, but we treat cash income, interest income, we spend 70 cents of that on average. Every time the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates by 50 basis points, they're taking another $61 billion in interest income away from savers. Now, I've never advocated for the zero bound. I never will. I think that the new floor should be 2%. I think that zero interest rate policy was a complete failure. Ditto for quantitative easing. Not advocating for that either. But what I am trying to tell you is that the Fed is, in essence, trapped. Because if they lower interest rates by another 150 basis points, because they're way too late, they're way behind the curve, they're coming to the rescue of the economy too late because they want to drive the current administration's fortunes into the abyss. So they're not lowering interest rates at a steady pace as the economic data dictates that they should be. Because of that, if the Fed has to lower interest rates quickly and aggressively, you could wake the beast of passive investing. And it's not the passive investors per se. It's the 40% owned by people 70 years and older. And what we saw during the aftermath of the pandemic, what we saw recently when the markets shuttered is that passive investing took a hit. And that's why Jay Powell is in such a tight position, because if people over the age of 70 start selling, they could set off a cycle and they could scare Americans who contribute to their 401ks on an automated basis every 2 weeks. Hey, the market's going down. I should be safer in my allocations. Wait, one's going to feed off of the other, and you don't have that safety cushion of the same individuals who went back into the workforce in 2001, who went back into the workforce in 2007. They can't. They're too old. So Jay Powell is, in essence, stuck.
What do you think he'll do?
I think he'll act too late, and for all the wrong reasons, because of politics and because he's forced to act. And the idea that the Fed put is infallible is going to be tested.
Hmm.
Because the Fed put has only been tested when demographics was in its favor. But demographics is no longer in its favor. And by the way, the same dynamic I describe could also feed through into the residential real estate market because, again, people 70 and older own 25% of residential real estate in the United States. We've just come through the lowest level of second home sales for the year since 2017. That's indicative of what's not happening in terms of the baby boomers monetizing the wealth that they have in theory, on paper, whatever the Zenstimate is or Zillow, whatever those things are called, whatever it is that they look at and they say, oh, good, my first house is worth this much. My second house is worth this much. My stock holdings are worth this much. I'm fine. Don't need to sell anything. But if interest rates start to come down and they say, I'm not making enough interest income on my savings anymore, I'm going to have to sell stocks in order to make more interest income at a lower rate. That's going to end up feeding itself into the residential real estate market because then they'll say, well, wait a minute, I don't want to sell my stocks. They're down. So no, I'm going to monetize the other wealth that I have built up in this house, or I'm going to downsize. Demographics could lead to what we call an adverse feedback cycle where it feeds on itself. And again, the Fed put would be tested and the Fed put for the first time would fail.
Interesting. When you talk about houses, we are seeing a softening of home prices in markets that were still accelerating in prices. It's starting to spread out. And of course, homes are priced at 2 and 3 handles for mortgage rates where they were just a few short years ago. And now they're 6.5%, 7%. That's if you have good credit. And what you're saying is, and we're starting to see it, Danielle, where people are concerned with the home prices declining, that they were holding on to the home because they had low interest rates. However, they're saying, I may need that money, just like you're describing. So we are getting a lot of inquiries where the baby boomers are saying, you know what, I don't need this big house. I can sell it and move in with our children or buy that condo that where prices are weak and they can get more for their money now. Do you, based on the bond market, I don't hear any indications that mortgage rates are planning on coming down anytime soon. Are you expecting the Fed to jump in and sort of do what they did before with the QE and purchase mortgage-backed securities? I mean, do you think we'll see that again as the only alternative to drop mortgage rates?
Well, I'll say this much. I have no idea. However, the New York Federal Reserve published a blueprint in the spring of 2024 that looked forward over time to the reduction of mortgage-backed securities holdings of the Federal Reserve dropping below the $1 trillion mark by 2035. And if you hadn't noticed, even though Treasury quantitative tightening has been tapered down to $5 billion a month, they've kept that mortgage-backed securities quantitative tightening at $35 billion a month. And Christopher Waller, Jay Powell, and oh, by the way, Kevin Warsh, if he is to be the individual who replaces Adriana Kugler when her term on the Federal Reserve Board comes up in January, those 3 individuals, the current head of the Fed and the 2 presumptive top candidates to replace Powell, neither of those 3 individuals are in favor of ever crossing the Rubicon again to buying mortgage-backed securities. Anything can happen between now and May of 2026 when Powell's term ends. And by the way, Powell's term as chair ends in May of 2026. Few people have noticed that Michael Barr, who was vice chair of banking supervision and regulation, just replaced. He stepped down months ago. Michelle Bowman was just confirmed by the U.S. Senate to replace him. But Michael Barr chose to stay on and finish serving out his 14-year term as a governor on the Federal Reserve Board. Jay Powell has every right to do so as well through February of 2028, meaning the U.S. president would, by law, only have an individual to nominate off of existing board members to replace the chair in May of 2026. That's why I'm saying if he's going to nominate Kevin Warsh, he better do it in January, just in case Jay Powell, who, by the way, I just said is being very political and trying to stick it to this administration because he's fiscally conservative and he's not happy with whatever's going on in Congress, which is anything but fiscal conservatism. Jay Powell has every right to stay on. And by the way, the Supreme Court just said individuals at the Fed officials are safe in their ruling. Other heads of federal agencies can be replaced by presidents, but they carved out Federal Reserve officials, the Supreme Court. So Jay Powell can stay on until February of 2028. Nobody's expecting that.
Yeah. Well, in 2007, the Fed dropped interest rates to near 0%, and it wasn't enough to save the banking and mortgage crisis. And we had a major financial collapse where approximately 4 million homes were foreclosed on. I want to pull a chart up here, Danielle, and kind of look at it. It's on mortgage delinquencies. And what I want to really focus on, because a lot of people are saying, well, mortgage delinquencies are so low, we would never have another crisis like we had back then. But I just want everybody to look at, back in 2006, right now we're sitting, if this chart is even somewhat accurate, in Q1 of 25, 1.78% delinquency rate on single-family residential mortgages. But if we look at really back in 2006, we were basically looking at about the same amount in Q2 of 2006 of delinquencies where we are now. But then you can see what happened very quickly. And by Q1 of 2008 until through to Q1 of 2010, look at how fast the delinquency rate shot up. Do you see where we are right now? Could we be looking at something where we could make this type of history again?
So while it's hard to foresee this being repeated, the counter argument is that we've seen a greater degree of home price appreciation in the current cycle, meaning there's more leverage involved. Now, people want to deny that the leverage is there, but the leverage is there. Whether it's an all-cash buyer who was backed by leverage, or whether it's somebody who said, you know what, I'm going to buy this investment property and get a really low rate for it. And now all of a sudden I'm A, at the center of mortgage fraud, B, as of September, I can no longer get the FHA to pay my fraudulently underwritten mortgage. C, I'm in my 70s, I'm ready to sell my house. Or just plain old-fashioned death, divorce. There's another D. That there are a lot of things going on in this housing market, a lot. And I've just named them. And to say that this can't be repeated when spec home levels are where they are, when you're seeing rejections and cancellations at the rate that you're seeing them, I think it's really risky to make that presumption. Somebody tweeted out something today and I said, hey, Melody, they were like, you're only in trouble if home prices fall if you bought between 2021 and 2023. I say, hey, Melody, right, guest on your show. Like, what are we talking about here? 1, 2, 3% of the outstanding 14% of individuals who own homes today, owner-occupied single-family homes, bought during those heyday years, but 2021 and 23, which is a polite way of saying they overpaid a lot. They're going to realize their home's not worth what they're paying on it. They don't like this thing called escrow. They detest the property tax man. They want to hunt down and kill whoever wants to replace their HVAC for how many thousands of dollars? So there's a lot going on here, and a lot of people who bought into home ownership for the first time who had no idea what it cost to maintain a home and pay for a home, especially when they find out that the neighbor down the street, they didn't sell their house for what Zillow said their house was worth. So what's going on here?
I think one of the things that I'm concerned about, Danielle, is let's just say with new home construction and existing homes, let's just say in the last 5 years, 30 million homes were sold in America. I mean, I know we've been last couple of years, sales have been low, but let's just say we had 30 million, and let's just say a third of those are first-time buyers. So 10 million houses, right? I think about that. And when you say they paid a lot of money, yeah, where you could even question whether they overpaid for their home, right? Like you just said. So let's just say that we have 10 million people that could potentially be upside down or in financial, a certain amount of that subset could be and go through some financial difficulties or in a downturn if we do see this market collapse a little bit. I want to pull up this unemployment chart because this is kind of, we've had these conversations before where we've talked about the data and how they collect unemployment data. But what I want to point out here is that in this period here of 2007, 2008, we are sitting somewhere about where unemployment is today, that 4.4%, something like that. I think last report, April of 25, 4.2%. And then here we hit this 2008 crisis. So from where we start to go up in unemployment, let's just say January 2008 at 5% to December of 2009. So not even 2 years. I mean, we hit, well, there at one point it's at 10% on this chart. Fascinating. But anyway, there we go. October.
Yeah. Yep.
Of 2009. We hit 10%. That happened. I mean, look at that almost vertical line of unemployment claims that shot up. I mean, obviously the 2020, when everyone was sent home, laid off, we started handing out the money at that point. Everyone was fine for the most part. But when we look at that spike and basically a year where we go from in the 4s to 10% unemployment, what could stop that? I mean, if we're talking about 10 million homes that potentially by first-time home buyers who purchased in the highest peak that we've ever seen, the largest housing bubble in history, what would stop us from potentially seeing this again?
I don't think we know what would stop us. One of the things we're working on right now at QI Research is adjusting the chart that you just showed to include the advent of the gig worker. Uber was born in 2009. Didn't exist back then. That huge shock absorber that's taken millions and millions and millions of displaced Americans and kept them out of the unemployment rate. But somebody just sent me a message today and sent me a link, and Uber and DoorDash are no longer hiring in California. I was like, wow. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a saturation of the gig economy that has acted as a massive cushion, absorbing displaced American workers. The 4.2% unemployment rate that you just reported is not reflective of what it was in prior cycles, because so many Americans who are employed are making a fraction of what they made when they were working full-time today. Meaning, when that unemployment rate goes up, it could go up really fast because the shock absorber of the gig economy has been worn thin because there's already too many DoorDash, Lyft, Uber drivers out there right now. So we could see a faster rate of increase in the unemployment rate today because we've already seen this shadow build of unemployed in an area of the US economy that simply didn't exist. We used to drive ourselves from point A to point B or call this thing called a taxi cab way back when. And those were rare. You used to park at the airport. You didn't used to get dropped off by Uber. But that exists. They estimate that 50% of the US population is going to have a side gig by the end of next year. Just to bring in extra income, multiple job holders, higher than they've ever been, highest on record, self-employed. Hey, I just lost my job, but I don't want it to reflect on LinkedIn. So I better start, what are my three initials? My three initials .llc so that I can appear to be employed on LinkedIn. The number of self-employed we have has gone through the roof, in addition to part-timers, meaning when we do start to see this next deeper wave of joblessness, there's very little in the economy to absorb that shock. And that's why we've seen 17% of home sales in 2024 go to multi-generational buyers because the income's not there. And you don't see it because the unemployment rate is so low, but the aggregate income, that's where you see it because people cannot afford to put a roof over their head, whether they're renting or buying. In the case of 17% of home transactions last year, unless they're doing it with multiple generations.
That explains the consumer debt, which I want to pull up here in a second. But I do want to ask you, is there any difference in the reporting today of unemployment? Like I think I've even heard you say that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're unemployed for over a year, maybe you're removed from that, you're no longer counted. Is that true? Is if you're unemployed for more than a year, do you know?
That actually, I don't know. We term individuals who have been gainfully looking for employment for 27 weeks or more as being long-term unemployed. And that's a sign of scarring in the workforce. And one of the reasons over the past 30 years that we've seen this secular decline in the labor force participation rate in the United States that's very much different from any other developed economy. It's not normal to have such a small portion of your economy, of your capable workers working. But then on the other hand, the expansion of the social safety net is nothing like we've ever seen. The amount of money spent per individual on welfare has absolutely gone through the roof over a period of time that poverty has not changed. We're just spending a lot more on every individual that's not employed. Taxpayers are spending more.
Do you know if those long-term unemployed over that, would you say it was 27 weeks?
27 weeks or more, you're considered to be long-term unemployed, and it makes it much more difficult to get a job once you're stigmatized because a potential employer is going to say, they haven't been able to get a new job for so long. There must be something I'm not seeing that's wrong with this person. And they just filter right out of some algorithm and they're never even in the running for a position, especially when you see law school applications going through the roof. People staying in school, graduates aren't getting jobs. I mean, it's a terrible job market unless you're Jay Powell, in which case the labor market is solid.
Yeah.
Which is so insulting.
Well, what you're describing, once they get to a certain point, must be the reason why. I mean, we just went through a hiring cycle here, and of all the resumes and boiling it down and having interviews starting out on Zoom first, because a lot of them don't even show up for the in-person interviews. But in asking the question about their current role that's on their resume, they say, "Oh, no. Oh, no, I haven't been there since, December or whatever." But it says current on their resume, and they're not even updating those numbers. Probably for reasons why you're saying. Will those long-term unemployed show up on this chart? I mean, do you believe the accuracy of what we're looking at when we look at the unemployment rate at now 4.2%? Do you think that's a real number?
No, I don't. I don't. And I think that the survey response rates collapsing is indicative of how wrong that rate is. And the question is going to be one of, are we going to see a major boomerang in the other direction because this number was flattered by the 2 million people who were added to the ranks of American workers because the Census Bureau moves very slowly in terms of immigration flows. Now we're seeing net out migration, meaning the mathematical pressure on this number is going to become immense the longer our borders are closed.
I want to pull this chart up. You're talking about consumer debt, or you're talking about wages and people not making enough money or needing second jobs and the gig workers. And you said 50, it's estimated that you think 50% of workers will have a side job by when?
By the end of 26, 50% of the U.S. workforce. That's about 170 million strong by then. And yeah, half. And that is, trust me when I say, if I could come up with this data on my own, I'd have a data company. This is just data.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this consumer debt in this Federal Reserve chart titled Consumer Loans, not including the 30-year fixed rate mortgage, but credit cards primarily and other revolving plans, debt, whether it's a HELOC or maybe your auto loan. Is this chart alarming to you? I mean, depending on who you talk to, they say, yeah, but the delinquency rate, the carryover month to month is low. I mean, when I look at this and from when I'm seeing home buyers and talking to them about their finances, and I'm talking about people with good paying jobs that have two incomes, they don't even have $5,000 in the bank. I'm thinking, how the heck are they paying these credit card bills? And then they meet with a loan officer and they say, oh, yeah, well, you need to get these, stop using your credit cards. They're going, well, I need my credit cards to get from pay period to pay period. And then they don't pay them off. I don't know where the information comes from, how they say that a lot of this debt is paid off every single month when it's this outrageous. I mean, look what happened. I mean, basically, you have a straight line here when back in the GFC where the debt just skyrocketed. But look at where we are now. I mean, is this chart alarming?
Oh, it's alarming. All right. It doesn't include buy now, pay later. And the only reason I think we've been able to see this off the rails growth that we've seen is because there's been a 5-year reprieve on paying your student debt. So, and by the way, it applied to some of the highest income earners. So it didn't come as a surprise to me that the St. Louis Fed recently reported that the top 10% of zip codes in terms of income earners in America are seeing their credit card delinquency rates increase at a faster pace than the bottom 10% because they have to pay these student loans back now. And a firm started reporting buy now, pay later debt to credit reporting agencies. So there's a double whammy for individuals who took on a lot more debt than they could afford if they were ever going to have to pay these student loans back.
Do you remember, or can you tell us what happened? So during the GFC, we could see sort of like the peak to trough in debt. And the debt fell drastically from the peak in 2009 through the spring of 2010. So really, I mean, from February of 2009 until March, somewhere abouts of 2010, we saw a major decline in the middle of a major financial crisis. Any idea what happened back then where we saw that that debt decline? Were these
When lending standards tighten, you're cut off. It's just a polite way. Tightening lending standards is a really polite way of saying you're cut off. And that's why we're seeing such dismay with people who are like, I was going to buy a house and I went to go get my mortgage and they told me my FICO score was this. I know it's not. I don't know how that happened. But that's what happens when you lose access to credit. It tends to feed off of itself. And all of a sudden you have this gigantic decline in borrowing and in borrowing capacity. Remember, mortgage equity withdrawal peaked out at nearly 10% of disposable income. I think it peaked out in 2005 or 2006. I don't recall, but I've recently graphed it out. But for a time, mortgage equity withdrawal was carrying a tenth of disposable income. Student loan debt at its peak in 2018 was at 8.9% of disposable income before that started to go down. And the combination of credit card borrowing, auto borrowing, all that, again, rose way up. And my standing question these days, nobody's been able to answer it because the only thing that's being legislated right now is the prevention of a negative shock to the economy by the extension of tax cuts. Nobody's talking about what the next wave of stimulus spending is going to be. The only evidence that I've seen so far is that employee retention credit applications are finally being processed again. But that alone is not going to carry this economy.
Well, now we're about 1.1 trillion in revolving consumer debt, and most just credit cards, and it's variable debt.
No, total consumer debt, I think is upwards of 12.
So that, talking about credit cards, I mean, that's variable rate. And I think the average, well, I've seen credit card statements, the rates are now as high as 33%. That's some people are paying. And I think, the average is like 24% on a nationwide level. I mean, this is nuts. I mean, these borrowers at these rates will never pay off their balances. I mean,
the Philadelphia Fed has put out two subsequent reports in a row that have shown that the percentage of Americans making the minimum payment on their credit card has never been higher. But the next report that followed it, obviously this is Philly Fed data. Jay Powell's seeing this. He knows monetary policy is too tight. The next report, the only thing it said was the record's higher now. People are not getting by. And yet, all you hear is, but I see spending everywhere. And that's because the American consumer will never stop spending until every single avenue of debt has been cut off. We're seeing cash out mortgage refinancings go up at these mortgage rates. Insane.
Well, I guess they're thinking, hey, if I can get a second mortgage or refinance at 7%, or even 7.5%, it's still less than what I'm paying in my credit card debt at 24%. But the problem is, as well as I do, they're not cutting up their credit cards. So they think that that's a free pass. They're like, hey, I just made this debt.
Yep.
Yeah, just made it go away.
Yeah, these debt consolidation loans are fairy tales because you're right. They don't cut up the credit card.
So, Danielle, what are your biggest concerns over the next 12 months? I mean, are they geopolitical? Are they financial? Is it war? What are you following most closely?
So we sit here and talk mainly in the abstract about consumer debt and buyer remorse. People can't afford to live. People are disgruntled about what their home's worth. But what we don't talk about is the fallout. And the fallout is what we see at the polls. And the probability that we have some form of universal basic income is real. There are a lot of Americans, the millennials plus Gen Z equals 48.5% of US voters. That is undeniable. And a gigantic chunk of them feel that they are owed. They've been done wrong by the boomers. And we know what happens when we directly deposit cash into US household bank accounts. We get double-digit inflation quickly. And yet, I think that the highest probability outcome of the midterm elections, because of how ugly things have gotten, is going to be catastrophic for the fiscal finances of the United States.
And do you think it's going to result in universal basic income?
I think it's very likely that we'll see stimulus measures. Best case scenario, it won't happen until there's yet another change in the White House. How the last time we had 4 changes in the White House, 4 elections in the row, was on the precipice of the Civil War. We're at 3. I worry about the animosity and the nihilism that I see in social media, the anger element, and how that is going to manifest at the polls. And the complicit role that the statistical agencies have played in recent years in understating the situation in the labor market, in systematic, unprecedented degrees of negative revisions to payrolls, it doesn't help the divisive nature of the United States population is not assisted by being lied to about what's happening in the economy. It doesn't help matters at all. So I worry. I worry a lot. I have children that would be called to fight.
Yeah, and you're right about the social media. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a time where we've seen so much divide and so much anger, and it is scary because I don't think it would take much.
No, I am blocking. I feel like I'm blocking and tackling because I can't keep up with the bots on my feed, but B, I don't allow politics on my feed. I just don't allow it. I don't allow obscenity on my feed. And the sad thing is, whenever I deliver the message and say one more word and you're blocked, this is not welcome on my feed. At least I can control the civility in one place. But the sad thing is, when I say your hatred and your views are welcome across a majority of platforms and a majority of influencers, I'm not lying. It's the truth.
Yeah.
People just live for clicks, and they know that they'll get more and more and more clicks if they feed the hatred. And it's genuinely disturbing. It really is.
Yeah.
We need a leader. Todd, we need a leader. We need a leader in this country. I don't care what party they're in. We need a young, vibrant leader who cares about the country more than they care about themselves. It is time.
Well, it's so true. You try and go to, you have, if you're looking at mainstream media, you have Fox and CNN, and, a lot of times I will listen to both because I just want to hear what they're saying. I mean, it's like, do I believe what they're saying? No. but I want to hear what's being said because so many people rely on it. I mean, so many people, that's as deep as they go, is listening to these news outlets. But it's so frustrating because, to your point, all they do is beat the other one down. They don't really talk about news or they don't talk about anything exciting. They just rag on the other side, and that's not bringing people together. I mean, you're right. I mean, when you have major news channels where a large bulk of Americans go to listen, and not even non-Americans go to try and get a pulse on what's going on, it's just anger. It's just anger. It's hate. It's divide. And yeah, I'm with you.
I was listening to some clips from the mayoral primary debate for New York City, and it was just a constant attack, personal attack. That's all it was. We're talking about New York City here, a paragon of metropolises worldwide that's on its knees. These people need to be discussing policy. How are we going to fix the city? And the only thing they stood on the stage and did was just tear at each other like ravenous dogs. That's all we get from politicians. We don't need that. We need somebody to rise above the fray and put country before self. It is time.
For the future generations. I mean, yeah, I agree.
But I will say this on a very positive note, on a super positive note. People 18, 19, 20, 21, they have an incredible work ethic. They have a passion and a love for their country. And whatever it is that our future holds, they're going to survive and they're going to lead us to whatever comes next for this country. If there's the fourth turning in between A and B, so be it. But the youngest generation of workers in the United States of America loves to work and they love their country. And you need both of those things to succeed.
Yeah.
And to protect the people of the country.
Well, let's kind of wrap up with the housing market a little bit because these young people want to buy houses. I know for a fact. I would get their emails and their calls all the time. When can I buy a home? Owning a home and buying a home at today's prices are bringing the housing market to a historical low sales nationwide, and we're seeing year-over-year price declines now, and like I had mentioned earlier, in a lot of the markets across the country. Housing market, including the housing-related services, I've been told by macroeconomists that they're about 35% of GDP. That's big. So if we have a recession in the housing market, that is going to have a major financial impact on us here. Much of the world relies on Americans leading the way by this debt, this consumer spending. In other words, I mean, we do a pretty good job outspending most of the people in the world. And I have read that the average American owns 12 pairs of shoes, 135 average outfits. And in a Forbes article published on January 3rd, as a matter of fact, I have it here. It was about car owner statistics here. It says that it was published on January 3rd, 91.7% of households had at least one vehicle, 22.1% of U.S. households had more than three vehicles, and that's the latest data available. That was in 2022. But I guess what I'm saying is that we are pretty blessed in the U.S., but what are we going to do? I mean, what do we have to teach these children? Do you think that this younger generation that you're saying that wants to work hard and that is working hard, do you think they're going to give up on some of these things and come to their senses and realize that they need to save and invest instead of spending every dime that they have?
Oh, I think the possibility is there because you look at the frugality of the children of the Great Depression. And that left an indelible mark on the psyches And you had a generation of savers that came out of the Great Depression. It's definitely within the realm of reason to see a societal shift, but make note of what it took to get that. But there's already articles out there about younger people coming together in small communities and saying, we're going to find a way to not have to spend to have fun. We don't have to take, a trip to Tokyo to have a great time. And I see it. I see it with my children's coming together as 17, 18, 19-year-olds and just sitting around a dinner table, cooking together, eating together, and having a very inexpensive evening, but enjoying themselves and talking and laughing. They put this down.
You're right.
They put it down. And when you put this down, you quit trying to keep up with the Joneses. And you just enjoy each other's company. That's going to have to happen.
I think they say what do they say? Hang up and hang out. I think that's what they say. I've heard them say it. Well, I mean, obviously, Danielle, I value your opinions and what you have to say. I'm a big fan of your work. And like I said, I mean, I admire you as a businesswoman, and you're a prominent leader in the financial space. And I think a lot of people can learn from you. And I think that you're a great influence to young women that are coming up, and that shows them that, they can do big things and they can overcome. And it's nice to hear your backstory. What do you have to say? I mean, let's just kind of, end on some advice. What do you tell the young couple or the young person that is angry at boomers, that says, you know what, you guys you were dealt the better hand, and we're struggling, and we're stuck, and we don't see any hope in sight. They're saying we're doom spending because I'll never own a house. I hear it all the time. What do you say to them? And what kind of advice and what kind of a direction can we point them to where they can make it?
So my mother was my greatest inspiration. She got her undergraduate degree when she was 36 years old. So she fought her way and eventually walked across that stage. She worked hard. She instilled a work ethic in her children. She doubly emphasized the importance of education, of coming together as a community, of religion. And I would say that people need to not look at work as the enemy. And if you don't like what you're doing, it's never too late to do something else. Find something to do that you have a passion for doing, and don't be afraid of going into a trade. My gosh, what the plumber charges. Just understand that there's more than one way. There's more than one way to achieve success. None of them are easy. None of them are easy. All of them can be rewarding. And to the extent that you can, bring up the next generation. Do what you can in your community. If you can't afford to go have fun 24/7, go volunteer. Help ground your context by helping others. My daughter's going to be taking photographs this summer of foster children who are trying to be adopted. She has a passion for photography. In addition to continuing her studies of Mandarin, and she's going to be interning as well. But she's going to go give back to the community. And as long as you appreciate what you have, then you'll always be able to provide yourself a framework and help those in your community, help those in your family. Be compassionate, be aware of what's happening in this economy around you, and do what you can. And the more you do for others, the greater the rewards that come back to you. It's not just Christmas that's the day of giving. It's every day of the year.
Great advice. Danielle DiMartino Booth, we know there are going to be big things coming from you. I know you're just getting ramped up. We've talked about it before, and maybe you may be running for some type of office in the somewhat near future. But I think whatever you do, you'll put your stamp on it, and it'll be great. Thanks so much for coming on.
And thank you for having me. It's always a wonderful, wonderful discussion.
It is. Thank you. Thanks so much for watching. If you like the video, you can let us know by smashing that thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please consider doing so now. Hit that alert bell. You'll know every time we upload content just like this. Keep those comments and questions coming. And one of the biggest compliments you can do for us all here at Sachs Realty is to share our channel and this video with your family and friends. This will help us to continue to build this amazing online community with viewers just like yourself. See you next time. Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal housing opportunity.